Hi, I feel like a mess. I am a mess. My room is a mess. You see the only clean part in my room right now. I'm not going to show you anymore because it's embarrassing. But you know, it's the end of September and I've read a bunch of books in September and I want to talk about it. So I'm here. I haven't been getting much sleep recently, mostly because I did it to myself, like 8 p.m. you're getting tired and you think to yourself, I should really go to bed right now. That'd be really great for me. And the next day, Erin would really appreciate myself for it. And then you don't because you're on YouTube and YouTube Shorts suddenly takes over your life and before you know it, it's 1:30 a.m. Yeah, that's happening to me quite a lot. So everything's a mess right now, but it's a self-deserved, self-created mess. So I will not complain. Okay, complaining stops there. I thought we could talk about all the books I read in September. Right now, I read 9 books this month. 9 books for the 9th month of the year. I'm glad it worked out like that. And I just thought at the same time, I could, I have this empty Starbucks bottle here, and I have some macrame string, and I really have been in the mood to redo my room. So the corner that you see right now, I can't really change that much about it. It's where my desk is, where my standing desk is, where my monitor is. Can't really do anything to change it, but there's a whole other side to this space that I want to make nice looking and presentable. So that's all I've been able to think about for the past couple of days as well. And I'm gonna start with something small. I'm gonna start with something small. And that's an easy DIY macrame bottle holder. Where am I looking? And I'm looking at instructions from prettyprudent.com. So if you're curious, I guess you could look that up too. It seems like it's gonna be easy, and I hope it is because I don't know if my brain can handle anything complicated right now. And yeah, here's my thread. I should really read the instructions. Cut 3 lengths of cord to 8 feet long. How long is 8 feet? Okay. I'm 5'4". Okay, I use myself as a ruler, and I think this is about 5 feet, so... the most jankiest method to do this, but hey man, we're just here for a short time, a fun time. What is the phrase? We're here for fun time, not a long time? Wait. Good. We're here for a good time, not a long time. Oh my god. I'm telling you, I am just... Today is not it. This week is not it. I'm so happy it's Friday. So I need 3 of these. BRB, let me measure out 2 more lengths of rope. Now fold all 4 cords. Hold all 4 cords together aligned at one end. Okay. Fold them so 3 of them are folded in half, but let the extra length of the 11 feet cord hang below the rest. Wait, what? I'm finally getting the hang of it. It's starting to work. Wow, that took a couple of minutes of intense concentration. Dude, tying knots is hard. Okay, now that I'm kind of getting into the groove of things, you can see my row of very messy knots, but it's okay. What matters more is that I'm making this myself. I'm not spending like $20 buying a plant hanger when I can make it myself, when I have the materials at home to do it myself. So that's what matters. Okay, so we can get into the books that I read in September, starting with Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This. So I read this at the very beginning of the month. I think I finished it like September 2nd or something like that, and I read it for the Women's Fiction Prize shortlist because it was one of the books on the shortlist, and it's actually shortlisted for a lot of prizes. So the Booker obviously is one of the prizes that no one is talking about this is on the shortlist for, as well as a couple of other ones I can't remember the name of, but I'll throw the name up if I can find it out later. But also say, yeah, I didn't really like the book that much. I do talk about my thoughts in the Women's Prize for Fiction video that I did. I think it was one of the last books that I read, so it should be towards the end of that video, and I will link it for you if you're curious. But yeah, overall, just know that I didn't like it that much. I think I gave it a 1 or 2 star. I should figure that out. 2 stars out of 5. Yeah, the book, no one is talking about this, is split into 2 parts essentially. The first part is about the protagonist, who is an internet specialist, except in this book they call the internet the portal. And our protagonist is again a specialist, so she is going around the world giving talks to different people about the internet and like how it works and why it does the things that it does. But I just found it to be unnecessarily absurd. A lot of the humor that is used, a lot of the phrases, or I guess they're considered like tweets almost, that the author reads and sees on a daily basis in the portal is meant to be very shocking and kind of embody, I guess, peak internet humor and like peak internet randomness and absurdity. And I just didn't care for it that much. It seemed very unnecessary and overdramatic, and yeah, so I didn't like it that much. Part 2 is a little bit more personal, and which is why I liked it better, because we dive into the protagonist's relationship with her family, especially her sister, who is pregnant at the time. And in part 2, we find out that the baby that her sister is actually pregnant with has some sort of a neurological disease, I guess, that causes the baby's head to never really stop growing. And so the baby's outlook isn't that promising. I think she was only said to be able to live a couple of months. And that whole experience of bonding with her niece, of seeing her sister go through that whole experience, kind of changes our protagonist's life and outlook on life. Our protagonist realizes that the pleasures in life are really super simple, and we shouldn't make life to be so complicated. And it changes her perspective on the internet as well, and social media. And I think it just, in my opinion, part 2 would have been a perfectly fine standalone novel with maybe a little bit more context. I understand that it's meant to contrast part 1 very dramatically, but unfortunately part 1 just kind of took away the believability, the enjoyability for me. And to be honest, I think the revelations that the protagonist comes to in part 2 isn't all that groundbreaking. It was touching. Parts of the novel in part 2 especially were very touching, but yeah, I think part 1 just brought it down way too much for me. So overall, 2 stars. And look at this. I have like a little, I guess this is supposed to be the handle. How cute. I can't believe it turned out how it's meant to be. Also, please ignore my nails. As I said, I'm a freaking mess. I need to get them done, and I've chipped off so much out of stress and anxiety, and she's not cute, but that's okay. Let me cut off this little snippet. Okay, so the second book that I read in September was The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Coe. This was one of the books that I had put on my TBR for this month, which, you know, sadly enough, I know that I'm not a TBR follower. Just, it never works out for me. I feel like every time I create a TBR for myself, it might as well be like an anti-TBR, because chances are I'll end up reading none of the books on the list. But in this case, The Magical Language of Others is actually the only book on my TBR that I created in early September that I read in September. So, you know, we'll take small wins where we can. So The Magical Language of Others is a memoir written by E.J. Coe, and it's written about the letters that E.J. Coe's mother sent to her while her mom was in Korea and while E.J. Ko was in the US. I don't know if that explains things really clearly, but E.J. Ko and her brother both in the US, her parents had to move to Korea for her dad's job there, and so her mom, as she's in Korea, has written her daughter, in this case E.J. Ko, a bunch of letters in Korean, and the memoir is centered around these letters and also the author's emotional experiences while she was reading these letters and kind of living her life, being a teenager, being a college student, growing up without her mom. It's a very fragmented memoir. The author's parents are absent from her life, physically at least, for about 7 years. So in these 7 years, we see vignettes from different moments in the protagonist's, I say protagonist, but it's our author's life. Trigger warnings for the magical language of others, by the way, include suicide attempts and eating disorders. So despite the very personal topics presented in this book, I did feel like E.J. Ko held us at arm's length as she described the emotions that she was experiencing without her parents, mostly her mom, around her. I felt like every time we got close to something personal, like a personal emotional revelation or something profound, we would shift to another vignette and we would lose that feeling entirely. It's something that I've noticed is common maybe for memoirs that I've just read this year. So I also read Crying in H. Mart earlier this year, and I felt very similar about that and the way that was written as well. And the feeling or takeaway that I got from that memoir, Crying in H. Mart, and this one as well is I feel like the process of writing this memoir must have been a very cathartic experience for the author, and I mean, I think that's amazing. Like, the process of writing can help them understand and process so many emotions and experiences in their personal lives. But as a reader, I feel like what I get from reading these memoirs is much less significant than what the authors are getting. Which, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that's anything wrong. It's just something that I've noticed is a thing. It's definitely the case for the magical language of others as well. But yeah, the occurrence of like getting close to something emotionally hard-hitting and then taking a couple of quick steps back, that left me pretty unsatisfied and just wanting more from the experience. I guess for me, I treat memoirs as works of fiction in my head, not because like I think they're not real or they didn't happen. It's just because I want to feel the same sort of things that a made-up fictional protagonist would feel if she were going through similar emotional experiences. So in this case, if I were to approach memoirs from that angle, yeah, I was very unsatisfied, and I just wish there was a little bit more substance in this book. A gripe that I have with the magical language of others is the discussion of poetry and about poetry. If you've seen some of my other videos, you definitely know that poetry as a subject, as a topic, as a form of reading, written word, is a very unapproachable subject, form, whatever, to me. And this memoir made poetry sound so like difficult to understand. Here's a quote from the book. Poetry is to say what must be said. So either the author said this or one of her poetry professors said this. But like what does that even mean? How is that different from any other forms of written language, you know? Poetry is to say what must be said. I guess in like a very condensed version, in like a literal sense, like the words in a poem are limited, so you have to say and pick each word very carefully. So you say exactly what you want to say. But I don't know, it just makes poetry and poems feel so far away and unreachable, and I just don't like that, because I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that it's not unapproachable. But I don't know, reading this book, it's like it reminded me of exactly why I felt this way about poetry my entire life. I think the description of poetry in this book just makes poetry feel like such an elitist subject and topic, and like, oh, you're not feeling real feelings, like you're not smart enough, or you're not reaching deep enough emotionally if you don't understand what poetry is saying. And that's just, I didn't like that. I don't like that. Can't say I do. So anyways, I don't rate memoirs, but this book, I was really looking forward to this book, The Magical Language of Others, and it left me pretty disappointed in the end. And I might just take a break from memoirs because I've read, again, I think 2 or 3 at least this year so far, and none of them have really done it for me. So yeah. And because I was so dissatisfied by The Magical Language of Others, the next book that I read was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. McQuiston. One Last Stop is a romance, and it's a sapphic romance, and I think it's actually one of the first, if not the first, sapphic romances that I've read. So that was exciting. That was very new, very different. My criteria, my expectations for contemporary romance honestly is not very high. It just has to make me feel happy. It has to be not too totally unrealistic and unbelievable. And the banter has to be good. So those are my only criteria for contemporary romances to be a good contemporary romance, in my opinion. In this case, I was definitely pleasantly surprised, mostly because One Last Stop isn't purely focused on the romance. There's actually also a little bit of mystery driving it forward. So it's about our main character, what's her name, Jane? No, that's the other girl's name. August. So it's about a 23-year-old woman called August, and she's just moved to New York City, and she's finishing up her undergraduate degree in, I think, sociology or something like that. And she's in New York because she wants to put some space between her and her mom. And her mom is an interesting character because her mother has spent her entire life searching for her brother. So August's uncle. Yeah. Because he went missing at some point in the 1990s or 80s, I believe, like 1985, something like that. And so ever since he went missing, August's mom has like made it her life goal to find him, and so she does a lot of research and digging around in databases and questioning police records and things like that. And August has kind of grown up being used to playing detective, I guess, and she's honestly tired of playing detective for her mom, and so she moves to the other side of the country to New York. And in New York, she meets her roommates who, I think one of them is a psychic, so that's fun, and one of them is an artist who does really large sculptures in pretty much their apartment living room or living area. And they're a very eccentric cast of characters because usually, you know, roommates in contemporary romance novels are always very fun and quirky and like very supportive of our protagonist and finding love. I just hit my hand on the table. Too excited. But yeah, they always support her in like finding love and things like that. That's exactly the case here with these roommates. And in New York, August meets this girl called Jane on the subway, and Jane is, first of all, Asian, super cool. Rarely ever see that in contemporary romance novels. So Jane is Asian. August meets her on the subway, and she is like super hot, super attractive, you know, the usual stuff. And they hit it off, and you know, they have a great time. Like every time they see each other on the subway, like August is like, hey, and Jane's like, hey, and then you know they have a fun little conversation, and August is really into her. But eventually, August realizes, and this is in the synopsis of the book, so it's not a spoiler, but eventually August realizes that Jane literally cannot leave the subway because she was somehow transported there from the 1970s. So Jane is like in a different timeline, and she doesn't realize how long she's been on that subway for. I think at that point is like for 40 years or something like that. And anyways, August kind of uses the detective skills that she's acquired all those years with her mom to figure out how to get Jane out of the subway, either back into her own timeline or into August's timeline. And you're kind of left hanging as to which timeline Jane will make it back to, if she makes it back at all. So this book is definitely unlike other contemporary romances because there's that external plot point driving the entire story forward, and I really liked it. It was a very refreshing take on romance novels, just because for once we aren't just purely focused on the two individuals mentioned. There's this larger event that's happening, and it's not something bland and boring, which is the case in other novels. There's like a little bit of a hint of sci-fi, and I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, but I can appreciate the genre crossover, you know? I really did appreciate it, and I thought that was very fun. And overall, gave One Last Stop a 3.5 out of 5. It wasn't anything groundbreaking in terms of banter or like the characters' personalities that were presented, but the plot was interesting enough to keep my interest piqued the entire time. Okay, and the next book that I read was Infinite Country by Patricia Engel, and I think I found that book because I was just bored one day and on Libby, and I saw that it was available as an audiobook, and also was only, I think it was a very short audiobook. It was like maybe, it was under 10 hours for sure. And so I just wanted something quick to listen to while I was on a hike, and yeah, ended up finishing it in a couple of days. I loved this book, so I picked it up, again not knowing what it was about, only that it was a short audiobook and I had nothing else to listen to at the time, and I am so glad I picked it up on a whim. It's about a Colombian family who are separated by deportation. Elena and, what's his name? Elena and her husband, Mauro? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. But they're separated. They meet in Colombia and they decide to immigrate to the United States. They go there at first on a visitor's visa and they stay past their visa's expiration date, so then they become living in the United States undocumented. And every job that they work at, they are constantly at risk, at fear of being found out that they aren't supposed to be in the States, and they're always worried about being deported and taken back to Colombia, even though Elena's mother is still in Colombia and they do have family there and they do have a very small business there. They just felt like life for their kids would be better in the United States, and so they decided to stay. And eventually one day Mauro is deported, unfortunately, and we see the effects of that deportation, that separation, on the entire family. The novel actually starts by us following one of the daughters. Her name is, I'm so bad with names. Talia. So Talia is actually escaping from, I think, a youth detention center in Colombia, because she is trying to catch a flight to the States to be with her mom. And the reason that Talia, instead of her other two, she has two older siblings. She has an older sister and an older brother. Talia, the youngest of the three, is, or has been, living in Colombia with her father, who again was deported, to, I think if I'm not remembering correctly, to keep him company. Talia was born in the States, so she can always return whenever she wants to, but she does grow up in Colombia with her grandmother and with her father. We jump back and forth in time. We follow present-day Talia escaping from the youth detention center, trying to find her way back to her dad to take her to the airport to go to the US. We also see snippets of Elena and Mauro's life, how they met initially in Colombia, their marriage, their decision to leave Colombia to go to the US, to stay there, even though staying was a very difficult decision, because leaving, again, they had a support system, some sort of a support system back in Colombia, but they every day made the difficult decision to stay in the US because they believed that it would provide a better future for their children. So I think Patricia Engel did a really, really good job highlighting really tough issues, very real issues and challenges that families face on an everyday basis, while also creating characters that feel very personal to you, feel very lovable. Even Talia, even though she's a runaway and she was put in the detention center because she hurt a man very badly, for killing a kitten, by the way. So I feel like it's not that bad what she did. The man killed the cat. She just kind of poured hot oil on him. Anyways, even though she does something bad legally, she does something unacceptable, we still are rooting for her the whole time, and we're rooting for her family, and no one character is made out to be a villain, except for one guy. There's one guy. If you read, you know exactly who the villain is. He has no redeeming qualities. But for the most part, characters in here are very complex. You know, they have, their emotions are expressed so vividly and so beautifully through Patricia Engel's writing. And oh my gosh, the descriptions of scenery and physical setting was also beautiful. So if you like audiobooks, I would actually highly recommend this audiobook. But if you do read it physically, I think it's a very short book. It's only like 100 something pages. And it was published March of this year. So also a very recent novel, and yeah, highly recommend. Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on. How cute is this? That was actually a lot quicker than I expected. I'm so impressed. How cute. Look, it's gonna hang right there. Oh my gosh. I definitely think the hardest part of that macrame process was just cutting the rope. Measuring took me so long, but the actual tying and braiding part of it was really fun, really simple. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10. Then I read Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too, or Everyone's an Aliebn When You're an Aliebn Too. By, on here it says his name is Jomny Son, but he goes under the name Johnny Son now. I think Jomny was just a, what's it called, pseudonym? I think that's the word. Again, my brain is rotting with all the Valorant I play these days. This is a very cute, very short, very sweet graphic novel, I guess. It's pretty much a picture book. I guess it's not, it doesn't have panels and things like that like a graphic novel typically does. It is pretty much a picture book, but the topics discussed, are they suitable for kids? I guess they could be, but they're very existential. The only way that I can think of describing this book is like peak existential comfort, because you read it and it talks about loneliness and belonging and not knowing who you are and what you're going to be, and being paralyzed by the decisions that you can make for your entire life, and touches on art, you know, on being present, being alive, and all those things. And connecting with people, with nature, so many typically very abstract topics, and it does it in a very short and sweet and cute way. Let me show you. I took screenshots of the book because I really want to embroider a couple of pieces for my room. But look at this. Like, it's not cute. It's about an egg, you know? One of the characters is an egg, and he's worried about what he could become. But why worry about what you'd become when you, in the present moment, can be anything you want to be, right? It's just so comforting and uplifting, and yeah, a very warm read. You know, I would describe it as like a blanket hug. That's how I would describe it. I did read Johnny Son's collection of essays, which came out earlier this year, and I feel like that collection of essays, it's called Goodbye Again. It's pretty much the expanded essay form of Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too. So if you've read this graphic novel and you're interested in reading more of Johnny's thoughts on these topics, on similar topics, loneliness, belonging, family, things like that, I would highly, highly recommend his collection of essays. It does feel a little melancholic, the entire collection of essays. So does this graphic novel, this little picture book here. But if that's what you're into and if that's what you are in the mood for, then I would highly, highly recommend. Next, I read The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen, Hermes, Gowar. And this was a book that I saw when I was just browsing at my local bookstore. I was attracted to it because I'm a hoe for covers. I'm the biggest cover hoe, like judge a book by its cover, like that's me. I always judge books by their covers. And this cover really piqued my interest, but I wasn't gonna buy a new book that day. I've been on a new book buying ban for a while. The only new book that I bought recently is The Hidden Palace, and that's because I love Helen Wecker, but that's not relevant. So I looked it up and it was available at my library on Libby, so I decided to listen to it as an audiobook, and it was a very long audiobook because this book is also very long. It's 487 pages, so almost 500 pages. So it took me, I think the audiobook was like 20 something hours, I want to say. Very long. It took me around 3 months to finish this book. just because I would listen to it a little bit every day, or some weeks I wouldn't listen to it at all, and some days I would binge a couple hours of it. But oh my gosh, this book was so slow. Like, if there is a word slower than crawl, I can't think of one right now, but if there is a word that describes movement slower than crawling, like this book, the pacing of this book would be whatever that word is. Beautifully written, descriptions are amazing. Like, I felt like I was in 1800s England. It was so wonderfully tangible, each description, but oh my god, there was like no plot for the longest time. Let me give you a quick rundown of the synopsis. So The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is about two parties, two individuals. First we have Mr. Hancock, and he's a merchant, and he does business by buying and trading goods on ship by ship. So he buys goods and then he sails them somewhere and then sells them and then buys some more goods, and he's a merchant and he does trade via ship. And one day he finds a mermaid. So not him, but one of his captains finds a mermaid, and the captain actually ends up selling Mr. Hancock's ship to acquire this mermaid, because that's how much it costs and that's how rare it was. So Mr. Hancock one day wakes up and he realizes, one, he doesn't have a ship, so he can't work the way that he's been working, and two, he has like this mermaid. It's a dead mermaid, by the way. It's like also not a very pretty mermaid. Mermaids in this book are like very ugly, grotesque looking creatures, and it's a baby mermaid, so it's like very small, like ape-like is how they described it, and brown, and like with a terrible expression on its face. So he has this thing, and now instead of like his ship, which was his livelihood. So that's Mr. Hancock. And on the other hand, we have Miss Angelica Neal, and she is a courtesan of great accomplishment, is what the synopsis says. But she is a very proud woman. She's highly, highly desired all across England, and she works and deals with people mostly in the upper echelon of society. You know, that's how she was raised. She was very educated by the woman who raised her to be a courtesan. And her main goal in life is to like marry into a very, very wealthy family, to find a very wealthy husband and be supportive for the rest of her life and live in luxury. That's like her goal. She is a very bratty but charming kind of character. Like, she honestly reminds me of like she could totally be someone's younger sibling that I know is like super melodramatic, wants all these good things, but at the end of the day she's pretty sensible and has a good head on her shoulders, you know, and that's kind of her redeeming quality, and it's what's endearing about her. So the mermaid that Mr. Hancock acquires ends up being the thing, the catalyst that brings the two characters who are otherwise would never meet in society. We have Mr. Hancock and Miss Angelica Neal, and they meet, and eventually, you know, the story, the title of the book is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock. Mr. Hancock is a widow at the beginning of the novel. You can kind of assume and guess what she ends up being towards the end of the novel. And yeah, it kind of goes from there. Again, what an amazingly atmospheric novel. The scene setting is gorgeous. Like, Imogen Gowar is so good at writing these tangible details about the smells, the sights, the sounds you hear on the street, and the people chattering, and like the littlest minute details of someone picking something up in a certain way, and that's so closely tied to their personality and the way that they view life. And the writing is genius. The writing is so good, and the characters were just bursting to life, you know? Like, the characters are so real and so believable, with like tendencies and outbursts and flaws and emotions, and every individual in the book can totally be like a real person you just pluck off the streets in 1800s England. It's so good. It felt like I was watching a movie sometimes, where it's like, oh my god, I can literally see how Angelica like takes her tea and how she's talking with this group of people, and I can talk like all day about the prose, the amazingness of the writing in this novel. It's beautiful. It honestly reminds me of something. It feels like a classic novel. Like, I feel like I could totally see this being written in like the 1800s by like a famous classic author, and it just perfectly describing life back then, and these characters, oh, it's so good. and like the antagonists. So the main antagonist is Angelica's mentor, or like mother figure, I guess, because she wants to ultimately just make money off of all her girls, and is very profit driven and a little very manipulative. So she's the main antagonist, but you never at any point feel like she's caricaturized as an antagonist. She would do something that you're like, oh my god, you're an awful, awful woman, an awful human being. But then she would turn around and there'd be a paragraph describing her life, or there'd be a paragraph describing her thought process, her upbringing, or something. And then you'd be like, I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, that was still a bad decision that you made, but like, I get it. You're just human. You're just out here trying to survive like the rest of them. Oh my god, so good. But the only con for this book, and like the biggest con, and one of the reasons why I would be very hesitant to recommend this book to other people, is it's so slow. It's, like I said, like if there's a word that's slower than crawl, like not even inching, like you're like millimeters scooching forward. Like that, the plot is so slow. And part of that is because the descriptions are so detailed and like every little action is described. But also it's like, we see so many mundane days in these characters' lives, even though, like, I guess thinking back, each day does move the two characters, or two main characters, or like the plot forward by like a little bit. And I guess that's what life is, right? Like life, most of the time events don't happen in like quick bursts. It's always like slow, small decisions that lead you to this final event or this outcome. And I guess you can argue that that's what this book is doing, but like, as a reader, to live through those mundane days and discussions and talks, and like, sometimes it really drags. It really, really drags. That's why it took me 3 months to finish this book, even though I'm a binge reader, and once I find that a book is good and I'm invested, like, I usually will binge within a few days. But in this case, sometimes it just falls so flat. Like, there's literally nothing happens for like 30 minutes, an hour. I think it took like 30% of the book, so I think 6 hours into the audiobook for something to happen. I think it's like 6 hours for the two characters to meet. Can you imagine like listening to an audiobook for 6 hours and they haven't met yet? Like, our two main characters, it was excruciating. And then after they meet, they have to like, there's a long process before they end up being married, before Angelica Neal becomes Mrs. Hancock. Oh my god. So yeah, if you're ready and in the right mind space for a very extended, slow-paced book, then this is perfect for you. Like, it doesn't get any slower than this. And I guess the other small, it's not really a con in my opinion, it's just something to keep in mind if you're a fantasy person, is, you know, the title does have the word mermaid in it, so you go into it expecting some sort of fantasy, but I wouldn't say that the mermaids in here are super fantastical creatures. Like, I described the baby mermaid that is found at the beginning of the book. Like, it's not meant to be cute, it's not meant to be pretty. It's supposed to be there mostly to drive the plot forward, and towards the end it does come back into play, I think, more thematically. But yeah, I wouldn't, if you're looking for fantasy, like, I would say this book will be really disappointing, so just keep that in mind as well. Overall, I gave this book a 3.5. I think the praise that I gave to this book and like the cons, the critiques, kind of just balance each other out, and it was a 3.5, a little bit above average for me. And again, I would be very hesitant to recommend this just because of how slow it is. So pick it up at your own risk. I hope if you do pick it up that you enjoy the writing, because oh my god. So after that, I read The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon, and I gave this book a 1 star. It was so bad. I think after 30%, I listened to this as an audiobook. I think I was only listening to it to hate listen, you know, like hate read. And again, my expectations for contemporary romance, like, is not that high, you know. They just have to be likable characters, they have to have good banter, that's crucial for me, and then they just can't be too unrealistic. Like, the events that happen, the things that people say, it just can't be too unrealistic. But unfortunately, all 3 of those boxes were not checked in The X-Talk. First of all, the male love interest, Dominic, I'm very glad he's Asian. We love to see Asian representation, especially in contemporary romance novels, but he's such a dick. He's such a dick. He's like the biggest douchebag at work. So Dominic, our male love interest, and Shay, who is our protagonist and female lead, I guess, they both work at a public radio station, and they hate each other because of course they do. It's an enemies to lovers sort of a situation. Dominic is like the new guy. He just graduated from grad school with a degree in journalism. He's out here trying to do serious news things, and then Shay is more casual, not casual I guess, but she's been working in public radio for longer than Dominic has. She's 29, Dominic is 24. 5-year gap, not that big of a deal, right? Not to Shay. Like every couple of pages she would bring up, oh my god, I'm so much older, or she would say something that like highlights their age differences, and it's like, girl, just chill. Like 5 years is not that big of a deal. You don't need to freak out. You're not that old. You're 29. You're not even 30 yet. Like, just you're making it weird. She made it really weird. So anyways, enemies to lovers, they hate each other in the beginning, and then they're forced to do a podcast together called The X Talk, title of the book, where they have to pretend to have dated each other and broken up, but be on good enough terms to do a podcast together centered around relationships and like why they fail and things like that. Yeah, Dominic is like the biggest douchebag. Like, I just don't understand how you can be attracted to someone with, like, who like belittles you at work, like doesn't take you seriously, like who seems like on the surface at least to like be really rude to you, and then later Dominic's personality just honestly disappears. Like we realize, oh, it's all like he didn't mean it, like that's not how he meant to come across, and then he just like has no personality. Honestly, I'd prefer him to be a douchebag than to like have zero personality, because towards the end of the book, he's just a blank piece of paper, you know, like the classic perfect male love interest. Like he just wants a stable relationship, and he's been hurt before. He doesn't want to be hurt again, and he's really nice, and he has a great relationship with his parents, and I think the only unconventional, I guess, character trait that he has is he has stage fright. And that becomes like a major plot point. I don't even know what to say. And then don't even get me started on Shay. Like Shay was so annoying as a main character. Like I didn't want to be in her brain anymore. She's so judgmental, and like obviously there's that age thing that made it really weird, and she just is indecisive, and I would not want to be her friend. No thank you. And the third act conflict, don't even get me started. You know, every romance novel has to have a third act conflict, right? It's like something's been building up and it explodes, and then the main characters usually break up and then they get back together, and that's the happy ending. So the conflict is so cringy. It's so bad. And like part of it is maybe because I'm really uncomfortable with like overt PDA, and there's a lot of like public PDA. Not as in like, ooh, like let me like physical stuff, not like that, but like, I mean, they work in public radio. You can kind of, you know, like, you get what I'm saying? I don't want to spoil anything, but public radio, live broadcasts, you know what I'm saying? So that third act conflict and the eventual like resolution to get them back together, it was so cringy to me. I got the worst secondhand embarrassment like in a long time from this book, and I was listening to the audiobook for this as well, and I had to skip like 30 minutes in it just so I could be sane, stay sane. So that's the X Talk, 1 star. I'm probably not going to read anything by Rachel Solomon again unless it's accidental, but even then I hope she doesn't do this to me again. The sun is really setting, so I'll try to wrap this up. Next, Zorrie by Laird Hunt. I don't know if that's how you say his name. This book I picked up totally again on a whim. Like I said, I created TBR for myself, and then it like does nothing for me, because I just pick up books off of Libby, or just if someone's talking about a book on a YouTube video and I look it up and Libby has it available, I'll just pick it up and read it right then and there. So this was that. Zorrie is, I guess the best way to describe it would be it's literary fiction, and it follows the life of one woman. Her name is Zorrie Underwood. It's a very quiet book, nothing really happens in it. You just kind of follow Zorrie's life after the death of her parents when she's, I think, a teenager or a young girl. She goes to live with her aunt, who wasn't the best maternal figure for her, and after her aunt dies, she leaves her small town in Indiana to go find herself like any young person would. And this book is set in the 1930s in the Depression era, and it's set in the United States. So yeah, we pretty much just follow Zorrie as she moves out of her small town in Indiana, and then she tries to find work. She does work in a radium factory for a little bit, I think just for a month or so, before she realizes that she really misses life in Indiana on a farm. And so she goes back to Indiana, and we see her as she gets married. She doesn't end up having children, but then we see her relationship with her neighbors. And yeah, it's a very quiet book. It didn't really do that much for me, I think, because maybe it's because I am not a huge literary fiction reader, and maybe it's because I also need to spend more time with this book. It's really short, by the way. It's 176 pages. So I read it in like a couple hours, 3 hours. If I did have to, for example, analyze this book for a class or something like that, I think I could pull out a lot of different themes and topics to discuss and to write about, but I don't need to write papers, thank God, about novels. I can see the literary value in books like this, but to me that's not really the type of books that I would read for enjoyment. Like, I'm glad I read it, but it doesn't really do anything for me. So yeah, 3.5 out of 5. Okay, and the last book that I read in September, I finished this, I think literally the last day of the month. It's called Spirit Run, a 6,000-mile marathon through North America's stolen land by Noe Alvarez. This is, again, a memoir. I'm saying, again, I should really stop. I think I need to take a break from memoirs. This is about our author, Noe Alvarez, and like the title says, he runs 6,000 miles through Native American land, all the way from Canada to Guatemala, in order to, I guess, find himself. I'm laughing because I don't like that phrase, like find yourself is such a cliche phrase, but he does do it, and a lot of people do this run to either one, reconnect with nature and their ancestors, or two, to find their self-identity. It wasn't super clear to me how the identity part comes into play or why our author decides to run, but a lot of the people who do these runs, and it's a real thing, they are Native Americans, maybe trying to reconnect with, yeah, again, their ancestors, their land, their history, trying to find a connection there. For Noe, the identity finding part is why he decides to go on this run in the first place. He is the son of Mexican immigrants working in a fruit packing farm or plant, and he is the first in his family to go to college, but I think he eventually does drop out of college. I can't remember if he drops out or if he just takes a leave of absence real quick to do this run. It's a grueling run. It's like months long at a time, 6,000 miles obviously, in an attempt to reconnect, I guess, with his parents' active migration from Mexico as well. You can think of it like that. Yeah, and this memoir just documents like everything he experienced, all the people that he met, the things that he saw as he did this 6,000-mile run. I feel like this was written more for the author to figure out, to really concretely process everything that he experienced in those months running. For me, it really didn't do much. I mean, I did learn that this run was a thing. I didn't know it was a thing before, and I think it's really cool, and honestly I might look into this more and see if there's other books written by other people on this subject, fictional or not. But Alvarez's delivery, I think, was really flat. Like, he's not a writer, and I think it's really clear. He does a lot of, you know, people say like show don't tell. He does a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. So he'll say like so-and-so was like this type of person, and it'd be like, that has no impact on me as a reader. It's like, okay, cool, like this person you met is a certain type of person, like, so what? It doesn't really create any sort of imagery in my head. There's no storyline really, because it's just him recounting his experiences, and he does try to tie it back to his own personal family history and also the reasons why everyone else runs, but again, it's just presented in a way that's like too cut and dry. It's too straightforward. It just becomes like a diary entry. That's what I felt like I was reading when I was I listened to this. But yeah, I don't know. I just wish there was more substance. I wish there were more connections drawn between his personal life and the run, and I wish that it was presented in a more narrative sort of way so that it would be easier to connect on an emotional level with his experiences. And again, I don't read memoirs, but this was definitely very disappointing for me. The title seemed really, really interesting, but yeah, the delivery could have been a lot better, and that's really disappointing. Cool, so that's everything that I read in September. 9 books. It's actually quite a lot, and most of these were audiobooks. Let me see, yeah, so 4 out of the 9 were audiobooks, and I think that honestly it might be like a new record for me. I don't really listen to audiobooks all that much, but this month was a little rough for me in terms of doing things visually. I'm having some issues with my eyeballs, and I need to just take better care of them, as we all need to do, since our lives are so centered around screens, and screens of all kinds. You have your laptop screen, your monitor screen, your phone screen, your e-reader screen, so I just needed to take a break from all that, and I'm glad that there are audiobooks available for me to take my mind off of things. So yeah, happy October. Happy Spooktober, spooky season. I'm gonna try to read some scarier books this month and try to get in the spirit of Halloween, you know? The battery died. Oops. What was I saying? So I'm actually going to a haunted trail sort of a situation later today with my housemates, so that'll be fun, and that will definitely put me in the mindset of Spooktober, so that'll be fun. I will see you next week with something, I'm sure. I'll figure it out. I don't know what yet, but I'll figure it out. And yeah, aside from that, I hope you have a wonderful day or night